Thank you. Thank you, Dale. All the work that I have in this show is based on the work of Sun Tzu that was written 2,500 years ago. Starting with the first quote in his book, where he says, "This is war. It is the most important skill in the nation." When Sun Tzu talks about war, what he's talking about is not the idea of fighting. What he's talking about is the idea of strategy. Those same 2,500-year-old principles that had worked all those years in war were being used virtually unchanged in the business world. Today, of course, we write books about strategy, and we apply these same principles not only to running your own business, but to building a career, to parenting teens, to finding romance, and so on. The same ideas work all the time. After I started studying Sun Tzu, my life started changing pretty dramatically. I started getting promoted about every 8 months with larger and larger companies. Within 7 years, had my own software company. And one of the first things I did after we started growing and having a sales force was I said, I've got to teach my sales guys how I think about strategy and how I see strategic situations. Today, my reputation is as a strategist. I appear literally on hundreds of radio talk shows talking about, the latest breaking news. Of course, everybody talks about strategy, but actually most of the people you hear on the radio and television literally know nothing about what strategy is, how it works, or anything. And what I can do for these radio shows is put things into a real strategic perspective, that is, analyze strategic positions and talk about how people can potentially advance those positions. Called the Kingdom of Wu, which was a little tiny kingdom sort of in the corner. It was considered semi-barbaric. It was on the wrong side of the Yangtze River. And you know what it's like on the wrong side of the Yangtze River. It's just not that nice. But they hired Sun Tzu. And during Sun Tzu's lifetime, he actually turned Wu into the first empire of China. He conquered all of the Yangtze Valley. Strategy is a science. It's a systematic approach to achieving long-term goals. What makes it scientific? Well, basically, it's the ability to reproduce results consistently. Every time that people use these principles, they are successful in a very consistent manner. Why is strategy necessary? And this is probably the most important thing, and this is where we'll start really our discussion. Strategy is necessary because our natural reactions to challenge are all wrong. 3.5, 4 years ago now, I was diagnosed with cancer. And I saw people with cancers just like mine literally dying because they didn't know how to make strategic decisions. We don't know what else to do. Strategy, to put it very simply, is building positions that leverage your competitive environment to satisfy your mission. That's all strategy is. If somebody says something about strategy and what they're talking about doesn't meet that definition, they're not really talking about strategy. Now, there's a lot in that one little short phrase. Building a position, what does that mean? Well, the next hour, at the end of the next hour, you're really going to understand what building a position is. You're going to understand how to analyze your position and analyze the position of your competitors. The key to strategy is this idea of understanding position. But also the idea of leveraging your competitive environment is the key to getting what you want. Strategy is what you do. It is a process. It's a science based on the laws of human nature, and we'll talk a lot about those sciences. It's the way you analyze and advance your positions. Those are really the two parts of strategy, analyzing and advancing positions. It's a complete set of well-defined principles. Probably most importantly, a method for making better decisions. Better decisions about big things, better decisions about little things, better decisions every time you've got to make a decision. It gives you a framework for understanding it. And it's a way of winning without fighting. I originally called Sun Tzu's concept the idea of winning without conflict, because what Sun Tzu teaches is that if you get into battles where you're struggling, everybody loses. That there's no real winner in a battle. He said that a general that fights 100 battles and wins 100 battles is not a good general. A good general is a general that finds a way to win without fighting a single battle. And that's really what strategy is all about. But it's also about this idea of positioning. You want to define a position that others cannot attack and that people want to join you in, where people like your position. And you want to advance that position over time using the opportunities that your opponents create for you. A good position is that it removes resistance. It's something that most people can agree with and understand. It generates income instead of consuming resources. And finally, all setbacks are temporary. Your position may not work and often doesn't work. Sun Tzu actually teaches that you've got to expect failure. I frequently say that the only difference between my history in being very successful, and other people's history is I was right 51% of the time, and they were right only 49% of the time. Those little differences on a day-to-day basis make a huge difference over time. This is probably the biggest mistake people make, is they think they can plan out their success. You cannot plan your success. Strategy is not planning. Planning is for controlled environments. For example, you can plan to bake a cake because you control the kitchen. You can have all the ingredients there. Nobody's struggling with you. It's for stable conditions where things don't change too rapidly. And it's for specific results, like a cake at the end of the process. And it's basically a matter of following directions where you have a clear list of how things can be put together, a recipe in the case of baking a cake. And if you follow that recipe, you'll know you'll have a cake at the end of it. Well, real life isn't like baking a cake. Real life requires strategy because real life exists, first of all, in a contested environment. You're working in the real world. You're out there, and all of your competitors have plans, you have plans, and in the real world, this contested environment is where all your plans come together. And what results out of that is what nobody planned. Nobody can say how a given customer is going to decide where they're going to take their business. There is no absolute way of planning that. When you deal with the marketplace, and when you're talking to customers, you have just statistical probabilities. You don't have a controlled environment where you can say this is going to happen. Conditions are dynamic. They're constantly changing. And it's a very important part of Sun Tzu's principles that change has to be factored in. Strategy is for those dynamic conditions where things are constantly changing and you're putting the fact that things are changing into the way you're thinking about the situation. Strategy is also for a general mission. It's not for a specific goal. In other words, you don't have a strategy to get $200,000 in sales. You have a strategy to increase sales, a general goal, but specific goals are not the world of strategy. Finally, strategy is about adjusting to conditions. Strategy is a form of opportunism. Strategy is for making day-to-day decisions, thinking about where your business is and where it's going. Strategy is making choices about where to concentrate your efforts. It's understanding what works in marketing and why. It's being successful in making sales. Every marketing situation and every sales situation are inherently strategic situations because they exist in contested environments where you cannot control the things and the situation changes dynamically, literally minute to minute in a sales situation, depending on what you say and what the customer says. It's about organizing and motivating people, and it's about recovering from setbacks and mistakes. Strategy assumes that things aren't going to go to plan. And if you think things are going to go to plan and everything's going to work as advertised, you're wrong. Basically 5 components of a strategic position. There are 4 steps in advancing a position. There are 3 levels of goals and rewards that you have to think about. There are 3 concepts that define an opportunity that we'll be talking about. There's the surprising nature of momentum and what momentum really is and how to think about momentum. And there are 9 strategic situations that you get into and the appropriate response. Carlos Castaneda, in his book, A Separate Reality, said the difference between a warrior and an ordinary person is that a warrior sees everything as a challenge, while an ordinary person sees everything as a blessing or a curse. That we can see that these changes are coming, and we can either be victimized by them and the fact that we can't stop them, or we can leverage them to our advantage. Aimed at a long-term mission, if you're building positions, using the strategic environment the way it is, not the way you want it to be, to serve your mission, or if you're just reacting too emotionally to things. A lot of people get very emotional, and I say it's mostly because they're not trained. But you've got to look at yourself and say, do I tend to react emotionally, or am I trying to build my life more strategically? Strategy is about choosing not to do things that you don't have to do, so you have more time to do the things that you do have to do. Is that over the decades of your life, the smallest decisions can have the biggest impact on your future. If you make good small decisions, the big decisions take care of themselves. But the real long-term effect of that decision, which was really just to help my boss, was that I ended up leaving Big Pen, getting into computers, founding my own software company, and making a few $1,000,000. So that decision that was done on a strategically sound basis of fixing an existing problem in the real world, kind of a short-term problem, had very long-term consequences. All of my thinking that went into saying computers is I said computers, okay, are computers going to be more or less important in the future? What are the trends? Well, it's going to be more important in the future. I said in terms of my philosophy, as far as my professional life and so on, are computers going to be important or not? Well, they're going to be probably pretty important as far as a professional goes. If I can establish myself as knowing about computers, that works for me on a professional level. As far as the ground, are computers part of the ground? You know, can I focus on computerized systems and selling to people that are getting in new warehousing systems? Clearly that was an important part of the ground. So all this thinking, actually, it was literally, it didn't take me a week or a year to decide. I just ran through the list of things to make that decision. It took, 3 minutes to say, oh, computers, there's an opportunity. I didn't know how big an opportunity was. I didn't know it would literally make me a millionaire, but I know that it fit. The basic thing is how do you want to position yourself, what you want to move toward. Any analysis that doesn't consider all 5 of these things isn't strategic analysis. When we talk about whether it's the war in Iraq or political battles or whatever else is in the news that we talk about, economics, business battles, we always go through all 5 of these things, because if you go through 1 or 2 of them, everybody focuses on 1 or 2 of these things and they miss the big picture. Frequently the big picture is off their radar. It's about advancing your strategic position and the 4 steps of doing that. Those 4 steps are called listen, aim, move, claim.